When you think of comic book artists synonymous with the character of Spider-Man, you might think of someone like Steve Ditko, the creator of Spider-Man, or John Romita Sr., the second artist on the webhead who arguably gave us the definitive look for the character. And hell, you might even think of Todd McFarlane, an artist who revolutionized Spidey's look in the late 80s and early 90s. All those are great choices, but to me, an obvious pick is also John Romita Jr. And no, it's not because his previously mentioned father is an industry legend, but JRJR has worked on the character for so long, he himself has a cemented legacy with the webhead. However, this doesn't stop people from critiquing his work, and that's totally fine. People don't have to like the same things, and you can dislike things about someone's art, but it does seem like, especially nowadays, there's a little extra disrespect and hate when it comes to John Romita Jr.'s artwork. So let's take a deep dive and look at his Spider-Man specifically. And of course, let's ask the question, can they Spider-Man? The series where I look at artists that draw the famous webhead, and whether they've been drawing him for years or draw him for fun, I let you know whether or not I think they can Spider-Man. Well, as mentioned before, John Romita Jr. is the son of the legendary John Romita. And that right there is one of the first criticisms that Romita Jr. gets, is that he is a Nepo baby. So a lot of people seem to think that nepotism is the sole reason he was able to make his way into the comic book industry, and specifically Marvel, as John Romita Sr. was the art director for Marvel. However, it's been stated by Romita Sr. himself that he refused to hire his son. Romita would finally get in at Marvel due to editorial liking and enjoying his work. Again, his father completely wanted him to go a different direction, as he was scared of how other second generation artists went on in the business. When John Romita Jr. would get into the business, he'd start at the same spot as anybody else, all the way at the bottom. Jr.'s first official work on Spidey would be a 6-page backup story. And again, editorial really enjoyed it. His father said it was too similar to his own artwork, and he didn't even want to publish it. I think that shows how hard Romita Sr. wanted Jr. to work. He didn't want him to just get in because his dad was in the business. He'd grind it out just like everybody else, but unlike everybody else who got their foot in because of their parent, Romita Jr. would stick around and again cement his own legacy with Spider-Man and comics. When it comes to the industry in general, Romita Jr. is a workhorse, but when looking at his Spidey specifically, you have to acknowledge and respect the longevity. Being one of the only few Spider-Man artists to consistently work on Spider-Man in 5 different decades, and similar to other great Spider-Man creatives, Romita would be responsible for co-creating some new Spidey rogues, as well as Spidey casts that till this day we know and acknowledge. In the early years with the character, Jr. would definitely have more of a house style, definitely influenced by his father's artwork, but I personally still think that JRJR still had a bit of a difference when it came to his artwork, and the fragments of what his artwork would eventually turn into were kind of always there. And those fragments to the eventual style that I'm talking about would eventually come on his time with Daredevil. This is really where Romita Jr.'s style would come into its own, definitely taking inspiration from a Frank Miller and Jack Kirby. It's more of a straight and a blocky look for his characters. The look of this style would go down as JRJR's staple look. And he would take this new style and approach to the webhead in the 90s as he would return to some new Spidey titles. To me, this isn't just some of John Romita's best work, but I think it's some of the best work for Spider-Man in this era. I love the broader look for the character. It gives off a heroic and powerful Spider-Man, sort of in the same vein as Sal Buscema, which is an artist that Romita would look up to as a kid. I will say, because of this bigger look for the character and the way that Romita Jr.'s anatomy works, this version of his Spider-Man isn't necessarily the most agile. I do think he still checks all the boxes for what we want to see in a posed Spider-Man. It's definitely not the craziest stuff we've seen for the character, but where he meets up for that is his amazing execution in action. His pages can feel intense, and in a lot of ways, he does that through his backgrounds. He's able to capture the environment of where the scene is happening, and his panel layouts make for an engaging read, showing his high abilities with storytelling. This action-packed and intense style slash vibe would move over to the 2000s as we'd see John Romita Jr. team up with J. Michael Straczynski on the main ASM title line. And personally, I think this is Romita at his best for the character of Spider-Man, and in general, just some of the best all-around Spider-Man artwork. Now, before we go any further, I think it's important to point out the inkers that have worked with Romita all throughout his career. I've been told in my comments on these Can They videos to acknowledge the inkers more that work with these amazing pencilers. And when it comes to Romita specifically, it definitely is important to acknowledge, as the difference between his 90s work and his 2000s work is pretty significant due to his work with inkers. Specifically with the character, the two inkers he would work the most with is Al Williamson, which was mainly in the 90s, and then Scott Hanna, who was mainly in the 2000s. The biggest differences being Hanna using thicker blacks and shading, whereas Al Williamson focused more on small and detailed line work that emphasized stuff like equipment or architecture. Both inkers are amazing and legends in their own right, but personally for me, when it comes to pairing Romita Jr. with an inker, it's gotta be Scott Hanna. At this point and run, Romita Jr. would switch up his Spidey build, going for a more slim and traditional look. The sleek and lean body type I think works best for Spider-Man, so Jr. pivoting to that shows his versatility when it comes to the character. I also think that due to this change, his Spidey poses and agility look a lot better. It's definitely reminiscent of his time with the character in the 80s with Roger Stern, but again, it's more differentiated. It's not so close to what his father's style was. It's his own style that is cemented and that he had been doing for a decade at this point. Romita and Hanna's silhouette work is also a highlight for me, with spread pages that again take up the whole environment. It's as if you're right there experiencing everything that Spidey is as he swings. The action beats are off the charts, and the panel work only seems to get better as the art alone lets the reader know what's happening 100% of the time. Another highlight to John Romita Jr.'s Spider-Man, and in general his art, is the brutality of his pages. I keep saying this, but Romita knows action, and specifically hardcore fights where Spider-Man gets put through the ringer, battle damaged and all, look amazing when drawn by Romita Jr. From the shreds of the costume to the injuries inflicted, it all adds to the dynamic vibe of Spider-Man. Much like a lot of people correlate John Romita Jr. with Rain, and his Spider-Man in the Rain is absolutely amazing, I also connect a battle damaged Spidey with John Romita Jr. as he just does it the best in my opinion. After his 30+ issue run working with JMS, he would work on other Marvel characters, but would return to Spider-Man throughout the 2000s. And in 2010, again, he would commit more to other Marvel characters and would also venture over to DC. He would make his grand return to Marvel and Spider-Man in 2022, partnering up with Zeb Wells on an all-new volume and a new #1 for Spider-Man. And this is where things get real disrespectful. Now, it's important to note, and I mentioned earlier in the video, that Romita has always had criticisms of his art. There's always been people that don't like the blocky look or how strong he makes faces, how he draws women. But in the latter half of Romita's career, more specifically when he would work on characters like Superman, he definitely get a lot more heat, with people just straight up saying that this is garbage artwork. And while I can admit that, yeah, Romita is definitely past his prime days, they make it seem like he's always been a bad artist. I think the fact that so many artists, some of your favorite artists, have love and respect for him and do take influence from his work shows that he is a good artist. And of course, art is subjective. We won't get into that. But again, just the amount of disrespect, especially for a person that really hasn't been in much drama, if any at all, outside of comics. Romita just gets criticized for his artwork. More recently, his time with Spider-Man, people have claimed that this is one of the biggest reasons why the Zeb Wells run is so bad and is some of the worst, if not the worst, Spider-Man comics. While again, I agree that no, this is not Romita's best artwork, and the highlights definitely come in when we have fill-in artists, I still think that Romita does a good job with his storytelling and moving the comic along with his run on Zeb Wells. Is it as good as, say, when Ed McGuinness jumps on? No, but also the writing doesn't get much better either. I mentioned that Romita Jr. is a workhorse, and I say is because he still is. Working on a bi-weekly book is very difficult as an artist, and Romita Jr. has always classified himself as a deadline artist. He's gonna get you the artwork when it's supposed to be given, but people get mad at him as if he's taking opportunities from newer or younger artists that could be working on the Spider-Man book. But you have to understand that the fill-in artists for Spider-Man, like Patrick Gleason and Ed McGuinness, are industry veterans on their own. They're not young, they're not new by any sense of the word. So instead of people getting mad at Romita for doing his job, probably because he needs to, well, you should really be getting mad at Marvel editorial, which respectfully, I will say a lot of people do, and I think we need to keep rocking with that. But there's not enough pressure on the fact that Marvel isn't hiring newer and younger artists, or Marvel isn't approaching the more popular artists to work on their more popular books. Not too long ago, my homie Yoo-Hoo from Yoo-Hoo Comic Review made a TikTok that kind of went a little viral in our small little comic space, talking about how people need to stop hating on Romita Jr. A really great point that he brought up that I hadn't even thought of is we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't know why Romita Jr. is still working into his late 60s. Again, that brings it back to artists and creatives in general in the comic space not really getting what they deserve. We don't know if Romita Jr. wants to actually be retired at home, just living his life. He could be doing his job, by the way, that, you know, he has to do to pay bills. He might be doing that because he has to, because he's a normal dude just like you and me. Although you'd think someone like Romita Jr., who's been in the industry for decades, would be well off, you'd be surprised, as again, a lot of creatives don't get the right compensations for their work and what they've contributed to the overall industry. And that's where we come with the problem of older comic book creators not even being able to cover medical bills. I mean, we have whole programs that are functioning through the fans, us donating to them to medically help these older creators. Marvel is a billion-dollar industry. I think they can cover some health programs for artists and creators. Even if you don't like Romita's new Spidey as much as his prime, I'm never going to blame him or give hate to him. I'm going to appreciate the fact that this legend is still living, and no matter what, he's drawing our favorite character in Spider-Man. Overall, Romita Jr. is a brilliant artist, and his time on Spider-Man is a huge focal point to the character, and true fans should be able to recognize his contributions to the webhead. But what do you guys think of John Romita Jr.? Let me know down below, and thanks so much for watching. Subscribe for more.